Week 1 of the fantasy football season with the season finally here. His running back sits this week. First start, Devon Achane, the Miami Dolphins. So this week, a pretty good matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know Achane last season, he didn't get even 50% of the work, but he still averaged about 8 yards per carry. And his home run ability and breakaway speed makes him one of the better running backs in all pro football. And if he just gained a little bit more weight, is Achane and was a bigger frame running back, he possibly be the best running back in all pro football. That's the skill set and just the way he plays in the scheme of Mike McDaniel. So we saw it last season with Achane. He don't need, 20, 25 touches per game to be productive and put up numbers. So this week in a good matchup and a home game for Miami, where they put up way more points at home than they have on the road throughout the last few seasons. He's a start. Next start, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. So last season, he was a PPR machine with Kamara, 75 catches on the year. But this season, I think the numbers are going to drop off a little bit. I actually think he's on the decline of his career in terms of yards per carry, but still catching the football and making some plays. Kamara could do that. And this week in a pretty good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, where their defense shouldn't really be that good once again this season. I like Kamara as a start. The next start, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. So Joe Mixon, first season out of Cincinnati after spending his whole career there. And it's a great landing spot for him with this Houston Texan team. And this week, a pretty good matchup in the fast track in Indianapolis. So this Texan team's loaded. Obviously, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell at the wide receiver position, Dalton Schultz. And the boxes aren't going to be loaded. And Joe Mixon is well a good receiver out of the backfield last season, catching over 50 passes. So this week with a good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts, I have him as a start. Next start, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Jones, I'm not a big fan coming into the season. I think Jones, his best seasons are behind him, unfortunately. He's been injury prone over the last couple years, and he's on a 1-year deal with this Minnesota team that if he does struggle, they could just cut him loose. But I believe Aaron Jones this week at least with a pretty decent matchup with the New York Giants. And we know this Minnesota Viking team is not going to want to throw the football 30, 35 times a game with Sam Darnold behind center. With a matchup with, I think this is going to be a close game between these two teams. I think Aaron Jones could go out there and have a good ball game. And, he wants to prove people wrong as well that he's healthy. And then the Packers made a mistake of cutting him. Next start, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So last season, second half of the year, James Cook really went out there and put up some big numbers for this Buffalo Bill team and was a league winner for many percentage of fantasy owners. So this week with a pretty good matchup and a potential shootout over there in Buffalo versus the Arizona Cardinals coming to town, making the cross-country trip. I think James Cook could go out there and give fantasy owners solid numbers, and he's a start this week. Next start, Zamir White of the Las Vegas Raiders. Zamir White, the starting running back. I know people think Alexander Madison is going to get some work, and even the rookie Drew will get work as well. But I think Zamir White's going to get the first crack. And last season when Jacobs wasn't doing much and was out towards the end of the season, Zamir White got some work and started a couple games, and he actually looked good. He's not going to catch the football out of the backfield, but he's a grinder in between the tackles. He's a big-bodied back. And I think in a matchup with the Chargers where this team's rebuilding in a way, even though Jim Harbaugh is over there as the head coach, I think Zamir White could carve out a decent game as a flex option in RB2. And the final star, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker, the starter once again going into the year. I know last season they drafted Zach Charbonnet second round in the NFL draft, but obviously it's a different regime. Pete Carroll and that whole coaching staff is gone. And Kenneth Walker, we know he's got home run ability and is a solid running back. So this week in the middle of the pack matchup, home with the 12th man, I think Walker versus the Broncos could have a good game. Now to my sits, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know it's a pretty decent matchup on paper in Atlanta, fast track indoors, but this offense really don't have much going for them over there as Pittsburgh. I think they're going to be one of the lower half offenses in the league. George Pickens, no doubt a great acrobatic catch wide receiver, but obviously there's a lot of games he's disappeared. Pat Freiermuth, a decent tight end, Najee Harris, and also Jalen Warren back there in the backfield as well, as we know is going to get work as long as he's playing in this ball game. So Najee Harris, I know he's falling down draft boards going into the season. He has going that 4th, 5th, even 6th round range we've seen Harris go. But I believe his ceiling's like 15 points is Harris, and this week at Atlanta, I don't see him doing much. Next sits Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So we know Ford, he's going to be the starter for at least the first 4 weeks of the season. And I believe, worst case, possibly 60-40 in Chubb's favor when he returns from injury is Nick Chubb. But this week, a very tough matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, where last season they were stout for the most part versus the run. Where I think this is going to be a grinded-out type of ball game between these two teams. And I think Jerome Ford, he still could put up decent numbers, but I don't think the ceiling is that high. And he's a sit versus a good defense. Next sit, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. I know people drafted Conner as their second running back in most fantasy leagues, but this is a very tough matchup with the Buffalo Bills. I know they lost a lot of good pieces on the defensive side of things, but we know this Bill team at home, this is where they take advantage a lot over the last few seasons. They get off to a big start, is this Buffalo Bill team, and teams got to play catch up and obviously abandon the run and one-dimensional. So I think right now, James Conner, most people are going to start him, but if he has a down week, it wouldn't surprise me. Next hit, Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. And Devin Singletary, he's the lead back for this New York Giant team going into the year after Barkley left in free agency and he signed on with Saquon with division rival, the Philadelphia Eagles. And they offered Josh Jacobs a nice contract, but he didn't sign, obviously, with the Giants either and went to the Packers. So now Singletary, the starter last season, we saw some good games out of him. But I think this Minnesota Viking team, their game plan, and a lot of teams' game plan is going to be let's stop the run and let Daniel Jones try to beat us, because he's been a pretty bad quarterback over the last season and change. So Singletary, most fantasy owners, if you got to go out there and start him, that's trouble in my opinion, where he's mostly a third or fourth running backs on your roster anyway. I think Singletary will have some pop games here and there, but I believe this is going to be a grinded out close game between two of the bottom teams in the NFC. The next hit, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javonte Williams, I thought he was pretty decent last season, was Williams for this Denver Bronco team and had some fantasy value. But now with the rookie Bo Nix in their quarterback and a tough matchup with the 12th man, I think this week isn't the week for fantasy owners to go out there and put Javonte Williams in the starting lineup. I think Seattle, they're going to load the box up with 8 to 9 players, and they're going to make Bo Nix try to beat them down the field with a limited amount of weapons in that offense. So this week, I think Javonte Williams, we're not going to see enough production, but I think throughout the season, he's a decent flex number 2 running back. Next hit, Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. So Ezekiel Elliott, many people assume he's going to just come right in and get 80% of the touches, but I don't believe that's going to happen. We know they signed Dalvin Cook last week, was his Cowboy team, even though I think his best days are behind him as well, and he's washed, unfortunately, as Dalvin Cook. And the same with Zeke, even though I know last season, the last 2 games of the year, Zeke had some big performances for the New England Patriots. But this Cowboy offense obviously has more weapons than that Patriot offense. CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, they're going to get work. Brandon Cooks, he's cooked too, I think, with his best days behind him. But I think Ezekiel Elliott this season, his role is going to be 50-50 with Rico Dotto, where he's going to get the short yardage situations and some early down work at Ezekiel Elliott. But this week in a tough matchup with Cleveland, and like I said, the burst is gone from Zeke. He's a sit this week in the final sit. Austin Eckler of the Washington Commanders. I actually like Austin Eckler as a late 8th, 9th rounder going into the year. But this week, at the start of the season, we just got to see how this Washington Commander team uses their backfield. Obviously, Brian Robinson Jr. there, he had a solid year last season. Now Austin Eckler brought in, and Cliff Kingsbury, we know he's an offensive mind where he's going to try to maximize both running backs in this system. But like I said, with a role unknown right now, Eckler, how many touches he's going to get and what downs he's going to play besides passing downs. This week, I think it's a little risky to start him, so he's a sit this week. So that's running back start sit for week 1 of the fantasy football season.